everyone, it's Mel here. Welcome back to the channel. Sorry I haven't been around for the last couple of weeks, but I've had the worst case of man flu ever, so I've been laid up for the last couple of weeks. Anyway, I'm back. I've got a video for you today. What I've decided I'm going to do with my Harley Benton gold top Les Paul, as you can see, I've removed the small pots. So I'm going to be replacing those pots. I'm going to put a new wiring harness in the guitar, kind of like this one. And I'm going to try it with 50's style wiring. Now this one's actually no good for this guitar because this guitar has a thick top on it, just like a Gibson. So I need the pots with the longer shaft on them, so I've ordered myself 4 of these. These have just arrived. I've made myself a very basic template, so I've just put this over the holes and then drilled those holes out to match the holes on the guitar. So I'm going to set these into my template, and then all I'm going to be doing today's video is just going to be some basic soldering tips for you and me showing you how I'm going to wire this harness up. So if you're going to get anything out of this video, you think, or any of my other videos, please remember subscribe to the channel. That'll help me out. And if you do subscribe, click that little bell notification. But without further ado, let's go over to the bench. I'll load these into my template and I'll show you how to wire this 50's style harness up for a Les Paul. Okay, so let's look at what we're going to need for this job. So we're obviously going to need a soldering iron and some solder. I've also got some tinned copper wire here. You can use any kind of wire. This is just going to be to ground the back of the pots with. So I'm obviously going to need 4 new pots. These are CTS 500k pots, long shaft. I'm going to be using a template to put these in, get me started. I'm going to need something to clean the soldering iron tip with. I can use a bit of damp sponge, but I like to use these steel or brass balls. They don't cool the tip down. We're going to need some heat shrink tubing of various sizes, which is going to go over this wire, and also over the legs of the capacitors. We're going to need 2 capacitors. These are 0.022 microfarad. So we need 2 of those. I'm also going to be fitting a new switchcraft jack. So I need that. Then we're going to need some wire cutters. Maybe some scissors to cut the heat shrink tubing, something to hold things down with as we're soldering. So I use this tool. I'll hold that down until the solder is fully hardened. That's about it really. You can maybe use something like one of these helping hands, and also some masking tape, just ordinary masking tape. Can also be useful to hold things in place for you while you're soldering. That's about all we need. So I'm going to go away. I'm going to load my pots into this template and then I'll come back. I'll just explain what we're going to be doing here. So first of all, I'm going to tin all of these lugs on the volume controls, the neck volume and the bridge volume. Just going to run a little bit of solder around each one, and I'm going to do the same on just these two lugs of the tone controls. This end lug of the tone control isn't being used, so it doesn't matter about that. I'm also going to put a little bit of solder on here where I'm going to join this end lug to that. I'm just going to bend that lug over to there. So I'm going to put a little blob of solder there and there. I'm going to do the same just this side of the hole and bend that middle lug across to there. Now if you're doing this way rather than using wire, you can, if you want, just use some wire. You could solder that to the back of the pot from the centre lug and from the end lug on the volumes, but I'm actually going to bend these over and solder them. So when you're soldering, make sure you're on a perfectly flat surface. You don't want to be soldering on an angle like that where the solder might run down and fall into that hole. We don't want that. So the first thing I'm going to do is bend these lugs over. So it's this end lug for the volume controls. Bend that over till it's almost touching that casing. Do the same for the bridge volume. And then do the same again with the middle lugs of the tone controls, but this time we're going to have to bend them sort of diagonally. So this is a bit trickier. It's where this tool comes in handy. And just pull that over a bit. Be very careful, don't use too much force or you'll snap the lug off. That's about as far as I can get that. Do the same with that one. So when I solder these middle ones, these tone controls, I want to be soldering as far away from that hole as I can. So I want to be soldering here, not right next to the hole. So I want to get that as far over there as I can get it. Like that. Make sure the soldering iron is hot enough. If you haven't done a lot of soldering before, might be a good idea to get some old pots and practice on those first. So for example, this is the little mini pot. These are what I've removed from the guitar. So you could practice on these, just practice, excuse me, practice soldering to the back of this pot until you get used to the heat of the soldering iron, the heat that you need to get it to. I've got this set on about 370 degrees, so it's quite hot. But the idea is I can get on and off quickly. You don't want to leave the soldering iron too long on any of these components. So first of all, I'm just going to flow a little bit of solder on each one of these lugs. So we heat the lug, then just flow a bit of solder. You don't need a lot. So it's literally just a second or two with the soldering iron. Flow some solder onto those lugs, just like that. I'm going to do the same with these two. You don't want to fill the eyelet up. This is just going to help everything stick once we start actually soldering. So now I've done that, I'm going to plop a little bit of solder just there. Again, stay as far away from this hole as we can. make sure we're level. Just hold the iron onto the pot for a few seconds. Flow a bit of solder on there, just like that. Heat the back of the pot. Flow a bit of solder on there like that. You don't need a lot. Now these are the ones you have to be careful of. So again, stay as far away from that hole as possible, but we need to be able to connect that lug to the back of the pot. You want to get right on the edge of the pot here. Just flow a tiny little bit of solder there. Same with this one. Flow a bit of solder on there. Okay, and now all we're going to do, we're going to heat the joint now between the lug and the back of the pot, and we're going to form a bridge of solder across this lug and onto the back of the pot. Heat the joint, flow that solder in there like that. Heat that joint, flow some solder straight across there. So that's joining that lug with the back of the pot. So those are grounded now to the back of the pot. If you need to put a bit more solder on, you can do that. Make sure you keep the soldering iron tip clean. Make sure you keep tinning it so it's always got a bit of solder on it. Now these tone controls are the ones where we need to be careful now. So same again, press it right up to the casing, heat that joint, flow the solder so that it's joining that lug and the back of the pot. Just like that. Make sure that they are joined up. So there should be no gap now between that lug and the back of the pot. Don't blow on the solder, by the way, to try and cool it down. Let it cool naturally itself. Doesn't take long. Just make sure that you've got a good contact between that lug and the back of the pot. Make sure you're not going into that hole with the solder. So that's that done. So next what we need to do is run a ground wire all the way around these pots. So from this pot to this pot to this pot to this pot. So between each pot I will just cut a length of heat shrink tubing. Like so. Thread that on there. And then that will stay like that. Okay, so I'm going to solder that on there. So we'll put a small blob of solder on the back of the pot again, where we're going to solder this wire to. So again, you don't need a lot. And then just put a very small amount of solder there. There we go. So now this is where we need something to hold this wire down while we solder this on here. This is where something like masking tape can come in, or you could maybe just use a pair of scissors like that. Use whatever you have to hand to hold that while we solder that in place. Okay, so I'm just going to use a bit of masking tape. I just find that easier. Put that where I'm going to solder it. Just tape that onto there like that. Sorry about that, the camera battery died there, but hopefully you will have got the gist. We've soldered the bridge and neck volume end lugs to the back of the pots, and the centre lugs of the bridge and neck tones. We've soldered those to the back of the pots, and then we've run a ground wire all the way around from the neck volume to the bridge volume. So the only thing left to do is fit these capacitors now. So these are going to fit from this end lug of the tone controls to the centre lug of the volume controls. So they're going to sit between those two lugs. Now you can just cut this wire if you want, so it's just the right size to hold that there, or you can bend the wire around, which is what I'm going to do. But before I do that, I'm going to get some more heat shrink tubing. Just going to cut a couple of lengths of this. I'm going to stick that over there like that. Then we can bend these lugs around. So that's going to go to the centre lug there, and then this one is going to go into that end lug there, and then we can bend this, put it wherever we want it. So all I'm actually going to do is solder this leg for now, because when I put this harness in the guitar, we're going to have another wire that has to be soldered to this centre lug of the volume control coming from the toggle switch. If I was making this harness up for a customer, I would likely solder it in place, but because I know this is going straight into my guitar, I'm just going to leave that. I'm not going to solder this side, so I'm just going to solder this one here for now. So again, just use whatever you have to hand to hold things in place. While you're soldering, I'll just put this magnifying glass there. That can hold that while I solder that wire there. I've already tinned that lug, so it should be very quick and easy. Just going to hold that on the lug and flow some solder in there. So I'm going to do the same now with this one. There we go. So those capacitor legs are in place. So that's ready now to take to the guitar. Put that harness in the guitar and then finish up wiring it in the cavity. Sorry about the camera dying there. I keep forgetting that my camera will only record up to 4 gigabytes and then it automatically shuts off. So I'll have to try and remember that in future. But anyway, that's the video for today. I'm going to break this down into 2 parts so it isn't too long. So in part 2, we'll put the harness that I've just wired into the guitar, and I'll show you the rest of the wires that you need to connect to get your guitar working with that new harness. Now, what I didn't do that I should really have done, I should have recorded the guitar with the old electronics in it before I took them out, but I didn't do that. I forgot to do that. So we're not going to be able to compare like for like, but I can tell you the guitar will sound much better with these better quality pots and output jack. It already has a better quality switch on it, a switchcraft. It will sound much better. And what I might do at a later stage is do the same thing with my Harley Benton Black Les Paul. And if I do that, then I will record that guitar before I change the components so you can hear a before and after comparison. But anyway, in the next video, we'll put the harness in the guitar, wire it all up, and then we'll have a listen at the guitar and see how it sounds. That's the video for today. Please subscribe to the channel if you got anything out of this. As ever, take care, and I'll see you next week for part 2. Bye for now.